This is something I've been working on for a lifetime. At this point in my life, I'm 69 years old. I've had years and years, oh my God, more years than you can even imagine, of experience in business. All the way from starting as a call center agent way back in the 70s to being a CEO and president as I am today. So being the guy that I am, I started writing a book because I figured, okay, well, maybe someday someone will see this somewhere, pick it up, it'll plant a seed for them, and they'll get some of the lessons that I've worked hard to learn. So with that, the book is called Lessons I've Learned in No Particular Order. I did grab onto a couple mentors, and all unbeknownst to them, those are the people that I learned with. So let me share with you some of the lessons I've learned in no particular order. Adapt to your workforce instead of them adapting to you. What? Hey, it is September 16th, 2022, Friday. I am excited today. This is a topic I really want to talk about because I think what it really is about, it's building bridges. And I want to talk about the truth that goes into building those bridges between your workforce and let's just call it your management team. So if you really look at a business, you're looking at this senior executive team that oftentimes can feel very remote, or when they get involved, they're kind of out of place. Then you have this management team in place, and the management team is who is implementing, they believe, what you're asking for. And then, of course, you have the people that are really paying the bills, right? That's the workforce that you have, the employees that you have, the people doing the good works, whose every single seat they're sitting in is the most important thing that can happen in that business. So 3 different groups, let's look at it as. I'm sure other businesses have more groups. Some might have more direct lines and see it as a single group, but you have these different groups. Let's accept that for the premise that I'm talking about. So how, in fact, do I, as the leader of a company, adapt to the people that manage the company that need to adapt to the workforce? Well, here's the truth. Forever in business, in the early 1900s and leading into the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, businesses didn't work that way. Businesses hired people to do the job that the business expected them to do, keep their mouths shut, and just be happy they're getting a paycheck. And it seemed to work, meaning that there were successful businesses just like there are today. And life went on that way for a very long time. Now, you have to remember, of course, that generation came out of 2 world wars where people were taking direction, and they were sort of raised in the ideal that it's important to just take direction. But then in the 80s, you know what happened? There were things like Six Sigma that started. I was a facilitator for something called TQA, which was called the Quality Advantage. And all of these programs in the 80s were the recognition that the workforce should not be ignored, that the workforce had good ideas, and the workforce had a voice, and they had emotions and a desire. And you need to bring them in, and you need to build an inclusive environment. So if you notice with Six Sigma, or in my case, TQA, in a way there were tricks. It's sort of a gamification of how to bring people into thinking. But here's what I saw happen. And remember, I was a facilitator of this. Through the 80s and 90s, I saw it sort of as a ploy. It was sort of a program in some ways that was I pacify the masses? How do I pacify my workforce so that, in fact, I can get them to do what I want them to do, versus we can do what we all think we should do to get to the end result. And that began to change as new generations began to work. And, it really came to my mind. I was the CEO of a company in the 2014, 2015, and I'm in Denver, Colorado, and I was asked to speak at a local conference about the idea of how do I manage to millennials. And the truth of the matter was, I had never given it any thought. I had never thought to myself that I should manage a generation of people different than any other time that I managed people. So I had to, fortunately, I had people around me that said, stop and listen. There is a difference in how you manage to this generation, what they were calling millennials. And now I think it's a different name for a generation. And what I began to learn is different generations react differently to what I think is the same thing. And so at some point, it began a study that I've had that said, how do I maintain my being real and getting the mission that the company, the core values of the company and the desire of the company embedded in my entire company, my workforce, and that includes myself. And how do I get us all on the same page? Well, obviously that's kind of a slippery slope because every workforce has different generations. There's Gen X and there's millennials and there's baby boomers, and so I can't just speak to a generation. I have to still speak to a wide range of generations within my business, but I have to recognize that different generations have different speak and they react differently to what I think is the same thing. So I began to realize that it's really about building bridges. And it comes back to some very, very, very basic things. It comes back to the truth, to the honesty, to the reality of presenting yourself as who you are. I don't mean crudely. I don't mean short and insistent and mean and nasty and all the things that should never belong in any relationship. But to be real and to live out in public my truth, and then to train the management within a company to live out their truth, and then to ask our workforce to live out their truth and let them understand that there will be no damage to them for living out their truth. So every generation may have a different way of expressing that truth. But I think all people live out their truth in some way if they're allowed to do it. And so how do you do it? So what do I do? Because, and by the way, I'm not successful at it. It's a work in progress. And I think anybody will tell you around me that I have good days and I don't. And part of that is living out my truth, but part of that means that I have to be more aware and I have to have some sense that my position requires certain behaviors in how I express my truth. So think about this in this sense. A business comes along with that leader, usually the CEO, and they have a mission and they set the core value. In our case at NobleBiz, it's being promise keepers, caring enough about what we're doing that revenue isn't the driver, that meeting our promises to people is the driver, and it'll result in revenue versus revenue first. So that's who we are. That's our value. Now, how do you spread that out within the company? In my opinion, requires transparency. So look, transparency isn't telling everybody of every conversation I had every day, but it is sharing the reality of where we stand in our strategic purpose and our strategic plan. And that has to do with numbers, that has to do with our finance, that has to do with our projects that we're successful and struggling with. And it has to do with this open honesty that nobody is feeling like, yeah, that person is just talking about what's good. Yeah, they're patronizing me. Yeah, Biederman really likes to rev me up, but most times he avoids our reality. And that doesn't matter what generation you are. It is open honesty. And all I can do if I'm authentic, and authentic is critical, is to express it in the best way I know how within the professionalism that I have. So in that regard, I do things like a monthly company meeting where we have employees at home and all over the world. And we get on a video and I just talk about what's happening. Kind of very similar to how I talk at home to my own family about how our business is doing. I talk about what comes to mind, not little games, no gamesmanship, no gamification. I just talk about reality like I'm talking to you today. And sure, I forget things, and there are things that I might not say perfectly, but I am always authentic. And I share that. And I let people see what I believe while understanding why I believe it. And the only way I can do that is sharing where we stand on the high point issues, our numbers, our progress, on and on and on. And so if I'm feeling excited and I am feeling that we're getting towards our potential, I have to show why. I can never anymore, like people did in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and pretended not to do, but did do in the 80s and 90s. I can never again just play people, right? I have to be authentic. And then I have to demand that the managers are authentic and that they talk honestly to the people in the company that are the real working people in the company that are producing and meeting the promises, and that they're sharing information. So in some ways you'd say the sharing of information starts from the CEO and moves its way into the workforce. So that's one bridge that we have built. But another bridge that we need to build is how do we have our workforce have a bridge into who they are and their authentic behavior and ideals and ideas? And how do we allow them to bridge into the company themselves? Well, one thing is true. It's not equal. Nobody says that a business is equal. Nobody says that everybody has an equal say on what we're going to do. So authentically, I can't pretend that that's the case. So I have to tell my workforce that. But you cannot demand from somebody without having heard who they are and what they believe in. And so what you need to do in building that bridge is bring the conversation to the workforce and say, look, this is who we are as a company. This is who the leadership is at a company. And this is how authentic they are. Where do you stand on how you're perceiving that? So you're still keeping the discussion within the parameters of that business drive and that business mission, but you're now opening up what some people would say is a can of worms and saying to the workforce, how do you feel about this? How's it doing for you? How's it working? How are ways that you can optimize what we're doing based upon meeting this authentic behavior that is coming through your company? How can you express where you're at? But there has to always be one demand, and it has to be a demand throughout the company on any level of position. And that demand is to be fair, to not be rude, to be open, honest, and not negative. Negative, you have to learn how to find a way to express yourself without being hateful, without being completely resistant. But that comes through the whole company. So I think, look, I could go on and listen, anybody can reach out to me and we can talk more in depth about some of the lessons I've learned in this. But I would say this, you have to be authentic and you have to allow the conversation to happen in any order throughout your company in an open and reasonable way, but with deep honesty from everyone. And then you must respect every person in the company, because every seat that somebody is sitting in that company is critical to the outcome for the company and most important for the customers, or we wouldn't have that seat now, would we? All right, let me tell you what I want to talk about next time. It's how a business requires, in my opinion, it's a requirement, how a business today needs to differentiate themselves from their competition within whatever market they're in or vertical they face by creating internal celebrities. So I look forward to talking about that, because creation of celebrities is really a dynamic that has always been really helpful to me. With that, look, you have a great weekend. Have a great next 2 weeks. But in 2 weeks, we're going to be back here talking about that celebrity stuff. You take care. Bye-bye.